All right, what's up, everybody? So I needed to do this video because I saw news recently that a whole bunch of folks have been migrating from TikTok over to a Chinese social media app called Rednote or Redbook. And when I heard this, I was first fascinated and intrigued. And then when I went to Twitter to see all of the posts about it, I was even more intrigued. And of course, I went to download it. And what I'm going to show you here is just an example of how culture and tech influence one another. And this is something that I'm going to be talking a lot more about this year because culture influences us at such a subtle level we don't even realize it, right? Not just from a language perspective, but from a design perspective, a user experience perspective. And it's quite interesting because Elon Musk has said that he's actually wanted to make X more like WeChat. And I think a lot of folks in the West and the United States have been so brainwashed by propaganda against the Chinese that it's made a lot of Americans, a lot of Westerners just think that China is still in like a post-Cold War era, right? And I understand where this has come from, right? This has come from the whole fear around communism, etc. But China has, for anybody who has traveled to China, you'll know that they are so far ahead of the West in many respects. It's ridiculous. And to me, I always found it fascinating when Americans or Westerners would just have a lot of opinions about China and Asia in general, really the rest of the world, and without having actually traveled to many of these places. And if you are somebody who considers yourself a free thinker, you should always question anything that comes from your own government, right? But that's not to say that all government is untrustworthy. It's just that we live in a society where we can't always believe everything that is shared online, right? And it's the same thing for any of the content that's coming out, from Rednote. But I think we have to acknowledge that anything that is coming from any one country or government, there's always going to be propaganda involved. In the world of business, we're dealing with propaganda all the time through marketing, because really at the end of the day, marketing is just psychology, right? So let me go through all of these tweets, right, from about Rednote. So this one here, 100%. I think this has backfired, the banning of TikTok. In an attempt to sort of isolate China even further, they've actually caused a whole bunch of folks to move over from TikTok over to this Chinese app. And a lot of folks are calling themselves TikTok refugees, right? I think which is quite apt because a lot of Americans or Westerners might not know what it's like to be a refugee, yet we hear about it in Western news all the time. So here,
Joining Rednote would be watching grocery hauls.
so this particular video I think is of this girl who's having a culture shock around Chinese grocery stores and how advanced they are. I lived in Singapore, and Singapore is way ahead of its time too, and China is just on a whole nother scale. So I think a lot of Westerners really get shocked when they kind of come across things from this part of the world to see, again, just how advanced they are. So yeah, one thing I've noticed having installed and signed up for Rednote already is that actually a lot of the messages, the video content it is a lot more positive. It is a lot more optimistic. And also a lot of the content around beauty is not necessarily narcissistic, like what you might see on Instagram, right? It's actually the beauty of like nature or craft or these sort of things. And I think folks have heard about this when it comes to Chinese education, right? Because they're big on culture in general. And they have very clear culture because China, has a very long history that it can draw upon. And, there's many reasons for the Chinese to feel proud, right, of who they are. And I think for the United States is really interesting because I think over the last, decade or so, people have lost clarity on identity around what it means to be an American. There's a perception, of course, around Americans by people outside of the U.S., but even within the U.S., there are a lot of Americans who don't know what it means to be American, right? Because there's just so much strife and conflict around identity politics, etc. And to a point where people don't even feel like comfortable enough to talk about that. Over here, again, craziest accidental cultural exchange ever. yeah, I think there's just what's really fascinating is you have a lot of people who are coming onto Rednote who don't know Chinese, don't know Mandarin, but they're willing to learn, and so you see this exchange of people from China who also speak English, helping to welcome a lot of folks from the U.S. and people are learning words in Chinese and Mandarin quite quickly, and yeah, you can see here Americans flocking to Rednote out of spite and revenge. Uh, yeah, it's really having an adverse effect, and it's quite fascinating because even for me, when it comes to content, you really want to feel like you're learning something, and I think China is a power to be reckoned with, and I think it is good that we have these two powers, from the West and the East, because together they should be providing balance, right? It's not about the West is best or the East is better. I think we do have to come to terms with the world that we are moving and shifting into is more harmonized, right? I guess if you choose to see it that way. I think we live in a society where a lot of folks in the West they're always looking to be best, be better, and nothing wrong with that, right? Striving. But I think the Chinese are playing a very different game, which is similar to the analogy I would use is essentially while the West has been playing chess, the Chinese and the East have been playing Go or Weiqi, if you've ever heard of it. And I think it's really important you study these two games to see how they operate because Go, say we talk about AI, right? Because I'm in the AI space right now. But AI in the early days, when they were looking to improve the logic, they focused on chess, right? But then once AI had finished beating the world's best chess player, they went to Go because it was considered to be more advanced than chess. Yet in the West, most people only know chess. Go is a far more complex game, which AI systems were used, or the game Go was actually used to train these AI systems. And so I think the Chinese government or Chinese culture really looks at the world in a Go-like manner. And the main difference is in the West, it's one side versus the other, two sides, and they go at it, battle each other, right? Those starting points. Whereas in Go, it's actually all about surrounding your enemy. And culture is very much like this. It's a subtler, it's a pervasive aspect that is hard to pin down. It's hard to quantify. Not impossible, but it is something that I think the West might learn a lot from the East in terms of how culture influences behavior, and how it is probably a lot more influential than people realize, especially when it comes to tools and technology. So I'm going to keep going down here. I mean, I'm loving the memes that are coming out. And Rednote app, you'll see here, more of this. And yeah, I would agree. More and more people are flocking to this app, and the experience is better. I gotta say, if I look at posts on Instagram, a lot of the times, I mean, not always, depends on what you click on, right? What your feed is like. But if you look at the concepts of beauty in the West versus the East, there are nuances to it. Exchange of culinary knowledge. Some people are already looking at the algorithms, how it works. Yeah, and so essentially, I had to put this video together because I just don't think many realize how big of a deal this is for a lot of folks from the US or the West moving over to Chinese apps voluntarily and being exposed to a different culture other than their own. And I think this is only going to have a net positive for everybody, because if we are honest with ourselves, propaganda has existed in Western social media platforms for years, right? And so when people are worried about, concerns of the Chinese taking, user data, I mean, American companies have been doing this for years, right? It's all about the narrative that we've been fed, and the things that we choose to believe in, right? So yeah, I hope you sign up. I'll share my details too if you want to connect with me on Rednote. But this is going to be an area that I think will become more and more important, which is this crossover of culture and technology, because Chinese culture influences the way that these apps are designed and even the algorithms. And those cultural nuances are also present in the way that we're building AI systems in the West. And so, if you're ever wanting to get a more fair understanding, a more balanced view of how technologies are created, check out Chinese apps. Check out apps from the U.S. Check out apps from Africa. Right? They are all reflections and manifestations of local culture. And I think that you can learn a lot from how these technologies are expressed and built through that lens, because they're different. And when you are using these apps, you don't realize how those cultural influences are also reinforcing certain habits in you. So this is actually a good thing, because if you move over to apps like Rednote, you're going to be exposed to different design choices, different algorithm choices, and it's also going to do something to your own paradigm, and hopefully have a net positive for you. So best of luck. Enjoy Rednote, and look forward to seeing more of you on there and hearing your feedback on it.